topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Sports for kids in America began with what we affectionately called sandlot ball, where kids organized their own games, made their own rules, and played until the sun went down. Then came along parents.
I'm gonna get you tonight because you let me down, brother.
No, I'm not.
You did. I don't give what you do. You let me down. I don't care if you're gonna play 100%. I'll get you, buddy. Cry about that.
Every time I see that, my blood curdles. Hey, we got a great show to go, show to go. You ever hear that expression 1,000 times that the show must go on? Well, you can tell by my voice the show must go on, but just can't get rid of this cold. But you know what? We've got a great pioneer with this whole organization. I was telling John, my son, who now runs the National Alliance for Youth Sports, yesterday, saying, we wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for this guy. And he's what you would call a pioneer that started the organization with setting the standard for so many youth organizations across the country. And his name is Bill Baggett. I'm really happy to have him on the show today. Here he is with my friend, Bill Baggett.
Howdy, Fred. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Bill. And you know what? I mentioned the fact that you're a pioneer, and you really are a pioneer in this whole thing. I remember the time we went back to the very beginning and trying to come up with an idea that you're going to train coaches and have them understand what their role was playing in kids' sports. And I went to John's coach and I said, hey, I have this idea about having coaches be trained before they got out there on the field. And he said, that's a great idea, but it'll never happen. You're not going to get these people out there on the field, Fred, in a room. You're not going to get them in there to get trained. They're volunteers and whatnot. And I thought, oh, this is the end of it. And then for some reason or another, and you remember, Bill, we had a meeting of the youth league presidents in Palm Beach County. And that was a long time ago. And I thought maybe if we bring them together, that I could make sense to them. And it worked. You were there. And you were there, not only there physically, you were there in mind of thinking something needed to be done. And so with that first meeting, I left. And the next thing I heard from you, and that was that you were going to do the program. So, like I say, you were the first person, the audience people can think, if you had kids and had coaches, an organization starts somewhere, and it starts with somebody who takes the effort to do what is right. And I want to applaud you for that. And I want to ask you, what was it like to be able to get out there and tell these coaches that they're going to have to be trained?
Interestingly enough, Fred, I started as a T-ball coach for 6-year-old kids for 2 years. Our league was called North County Little League, based in Juno, Florida. We had 3 baseball fields. 2 were for the Little League players, and the other field was up the road for the Senior League players. So we had children ages 6 through 18 playing in our league. We had 300 parents. We had 20 baseball teams, but in addition to that, we had 8 girls softball teams in the league. So we had a very diverse league there with wonderful players and parents and field facilities. When I met you at the hotel there, I was blown away. because I listened to you describe what your plans were to proceed with making youth sports a positive and safe experience. And I thought about that, and I contacted you after that about a week later and says, we are all in, Fred. I had a meeting with the board, and they're going to, they're in your corner. Whatever you need, we're there for you. The next step we took was you set up a date for us, the certification clinic. And I believe it was the first certification clinic, if not in Florida, possibly in the United States of America, possibly in the country. And I asked, well, how's that going to take place? She said, well, we're going to have a big screen and we're going to show videos of the different tapes that we have. I said, that's fantastic. Can't wait to see it. Then before I attended, I thought more about it. And I said to myself, you know what? We need to share this stage with other leagues within our area, not just for my league, North County Little League, the coaches and managers and assistant managers in my league. But in addition to that, let me invite 2 of the neighboring leagues to also attend and bring their coaches and managers. So I phoned the league president of North Palm Beach and asked him to come on board, and he readily agreed. Then I also called the president of the league in Lake Park and asked him to attend. So we would have 3 league presidents in attendance at this program. What we did, we went to Palm Beach Gardens High School and we rented out the auditorium because we knew we'd probably have about 100 different coaches and managers representing 3 different little leagues in northern Palm Beach County. And it was a phenomenal start, Fred. You gave the opening remarks. The first night was 3 hours of videotapes. We returned the second night after that for an additional 3 hours of tapes for a total of 6 hours. And that began a new era in youth sports coaching in our leagues in northern Palm Beach County, Florida. It was phenomenal.
Well, that's amazing, that you're saying that because, it's like the old snowball begins to roll. A lot of people wouldn't imagine that today, where you had the first one, now there's over 4 million people who act as coaches of parents that did in the past and still continue today to do that program. So it's amazing. But the question I have for you, Bill, is, when John's coach told me a good idea but would never happen, he said, these coaches wouldn't do it. What happened after you talked to them and they showed up?
That's another good question. Let me reference something here. Bear with me just a second, Fred, in my notes. Anyhow, we went to the board and asked to describe the benefits, advantages, and so forth of NYSCA and the certification program. And they quickly and unanimously approved that. So I needed board approval, and they were behind us 100%. So that kicked it off. And thereafter, I invited the adjoining league presidents and their players to join us as well. What a phenomenal start, wasn't it?
Well, it was, and you know what I'm saying. I remember after you did your program and began to spread, I ran out and did clinics and ran programs. And there's one that I will never forget. That what happened is we went through the whole deal with the coach, talking about the psychology of, the importance of being fair and honest and ethical with kids. And after all that, the discussion went on with the coaches and, what role they would play. And when it was all over, a guy walked up to me and I thought he was going to say, you know what, why did you make me come out here on a Saturday morning to go through this? I don't need to do this. I needed to cut the grass and everything else around the house. But he said, I got to tell you something. After hearing that sports psychology guy on the screen talk about how you affect kids, I want to tell you, I have damaged a lot of kids. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. He said, no, He said, I've done just what you talked about of being abusive to kids, yelling, screaming, and psychologically harming them. And he said, I certainly learned a lot. So, yeah, it was just wonderful hearing that all that from somebody. So I know you did, and you continued the program. But a funny thing that you said, Bill, you said NYSCA, and somebody might say, hey, I saw this program that said the National Alliance for Youth Sports. So what is NYSCA? And nobody realizes that what happened in the beginning, it was the National Youth Sport Coaches Association, right?
Correct. Yes. That was how we started.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and NYSA, National Youth Sports Coaches Association. Wow, we got off. We were out of the gate fast, Fred, and in 100% in believing and practicing, and with everything that you presented. I looked at my notes. I'm going back to 1981, and you met with our league in person. And you also commented on how well organized and sophisticated our league had become, and that you are proud to be associated with us. You mentioned that Bill Baggett, representing our league, was recently appointed to the national board of NYSCA. What an honor that was. And that was our humble beginnings, Fred. The first board meeting was the four of us. It was you, it was me, it was John Dance, who was the director of Parks and Recreation for Palm Beach County, and Jim Bohan. He was the head of World's Finest Chocolates. That was the start. You remember that far back? It was just incredible. And what you grew into year after year and decade after decade was just phenomenal. Our initial visit, Fred, together with our league members, you showed the videotape that had been made in conjunction with North County Little League on our fields and was seen by thousands of people around the country. You asked for our cooperation again with 2 new training programs, which will be filmed at our baseball park in Juno. One is a softball videotape featuring the National Commissioner of the American Softball Association, and second, a baseball videotape made in conjunction with the University of Miami baseball team, which was the 1982 National Collegiate Champions. That was Coach Skip Bertram back then. You remember? Head coach of the Miami Hurricanes baseball team. And the videotapes, I've got this. I want to just kind of cover what they were in the beginnings. It was a brand new videotape series developed by you that offers comprehensive guidelines for parents, players, and coaches who are involved in community youth sports programs. One of the tape was by Gary Sparks, Player-Coach Relationships, ideal for showing at league organization meetings. Another tape was by Dr. Richard McGill, who was a sports psychologist from LSU University. He came to our field, and it was filmed on our field, if you recall. It was called, the video was Parents Guidelines for Youth Sports, a must for showing at special meetings for parents who sign their child up for your program. The third videotape that we showed at our joint meeting with the other leagues was how to conduct an effective coach and parent meeting, presented by, again, Gary Sparks, which every coach needs to know how to deal with parents. Dealing with parents, this tape will show you how. Then, of course, there was Dr. Richard McGill videotape, which was phenomenal. He's a sports psychologist. His tape was The Psychology of Coaching Youth Sports. Another tape, Preventing Injuries in Youth Sports. Another tape by someone else, First Aid and the Volunteer Coach. The videotape by Skip Bertram in the Miami Hurricane National Baseball Championship team was teaching kids the fundamentals of baseball and softball, filmed right at our field in Juno Park. Those were the days, Fred, weren't they?
Yeah, Bill, let me go back to something before you had mentioned being on the board. I'll switch thoughts for you for a second, but you remember we started out with the organization with about $124 in the bank. And had no idea how we were going to continue. But then we had the bright idea, you and me, and that was to go to a bank, because maybe if we could get the bank to give us some money to get it started. So one of the board members, when we talked about it, said, yeah, that's a good idea. And we said, well, we need someone like you that has a background, because they're not going to give any money to me. And Bill was, being my support there. But Jim said, all right, I'm going to not mention his last name, even though he's not around anymore. But he said, I'll tell you what, I'll meet you at the bank on Monday morning at 9:00. And we'll go in and we'll go talk to the people in the bank and get our 20,000, and we'll be off and running. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then, remember? So we go there and we sit outside and we wait, and it's 9:00, and then it's 9, 10, 15, 20, 9:30. We're saying he ain't going to show. And he never did show. But you know what happened from that? I don't know. It may have been one of your meetings. Somebody picked up on it. But there was a guy that was there that was president of one of the local fraternal organizations, and he invited me to come to speak. And I went in and spoke. He came up afterwards. He said, a great idea. We're going to donate $10,000 to you guys. I thought, oh my God, we're going to get 10,000. So that led us on our way and whatnot. And, but I want to tell you, I want to thank you very much for being here today. It was really great seeing you and knowing, as I said in the very beginning, that you're a pioneer in all of this and setting this whole thing across America for the last almost 40 years. So again, thank you. But one thing before, I had to show you this. I'm going to ask Juan to turn it on. There was a thing the other day, and you'll see it, but it reminded me of your wife, B, running the concession stand. And she's doing the concession stand. I want your reaction after you see this in a second, if Juan can pull it up.
Hera, Oklahoma, a Little League basketball program, will be unable to follow its yearly tradition of providing its players with college scholarships this year after Hera police say the program's treasurer drained the league's bank account, spending it all at restaurants, stores, and much more. Coffee shops, Instacart, PayPal, AT, and T-bills. Those were just a few of the things and places that Hera Police Chief Marty Burns told News Nation. The defendant spent more than $27,000 that belonged to the Hera Little League Basketball Association over the past year. A lot of these were very obviously not basketball related, Burns said. Burns says his department first started investigating after the association's president reported to police that the association's bank account had been nearly drained of all funds. There was about $2 left in the account, Burns said.
Can you imagine that, Bill? As I mentioned before, your wife, B, took duties of running your concession stand there. That was such a great time. We did a video that was sponsored by Gatorade. And I wondered, have you ever heard of anything like this before? I know it goes on across the country, but give me your take on what that guy just said.
Fortunately, it's a rarity. And it's extremely unfortunate that something like that would occur in a league, because a league spends a lot of time and effort in fundraising to make things possible for a successful season. B, for example, took a shell of a building and she converted it into what became our largest moneymaker in the entire league. She said she had everything inside the concession stand that you could ask for. She generated over $13,000 in profit for the league, which was partially responsible for us to buy all of the players brand new uniforms, field equipment, do the field upgrades and field improvements and so forth. I want to show you real quick. This is an annual article that appeared in Women's Day magazine. And on the cover it was about Little Leagues throughout the nation. On the cover is Tom Selleck. Remember Tom Selleck from Magnum PI? And inside this article was a 2-page story about my wife B, entitled "How to Paint Your Little League Green." And it described everything that B had done. We changed the name from concession stand to confession stand, because everybody loved to migrate around the concession stand and talk and chat and have a great time. B was instrumental in helping me personally with all the clerical duties, the typing, programs, the administrative aspects to go along with what we accomplished for the parents and children in that league back in those 2 years. It was just a wonderful experience for us personally.
Yeah, I can remember all the things that she did, and you know the old expression, "It takes two to tango," and you guys could really tango. But Bill, again, I want to thank you for being on, and thank you for all the years that you gave to the organization.
It's been a pleasure, Fred. You are a living legend, guy. A living legend. I know how modest you are, but boy, what an impact and difference that you made in many, many people's lives. Thank you for what you did.
Well, thanks again, Bill. We're going to go now to a little commercial, I think, from Juan, and promote a book that I wrote.
In this best-selling book, a child, while failing to live up to his father's expectations, is shamed and humiliated beyond belief. He vows to never allow his own son to face the same.
It's great having Bill Baggett back on the program. Well, he wasn't back. He'd never been back, but he'd been back in my mind because I hadn't seen him for a while. And you think back, wow, those years and everything we tried to do. But, you know, I mentioned before that we have the opportunity with the National Alliance for Youth Sports to interview a great number of top athletes and coaches and throughout the country. And we showed an excerpt of Herb Kirkstreet last week. And this week, we have Greg Olson. And Greg is talking about something that is so important to parents, and that is dealing with failure. You know, I'll never forget, and I told this before on a previous show, a judge was telling me that they were going home from a football game, and his wife was sitting next to him in the car yelling at her son, their son, about all the things he did wrong in the game and why they lost. And I thought, man, somebody's got to understand this. So I want you to listen to some of the things that Greg Olson has to say if you're a parent and if you're thinking about coaching or are coaching.
And it's very easy as parents, and we all fall guilty of this, including myself at times, where you feel like you're doing a better job as a parent if you remove the ability to fail. You don't put them in that tough spot. You don't put them in that hard game. You don't put them in that critical situation. And that's in their best interest, because everyone directly correlates failure and lack of confidence, and they're not going to want to do it anymore and all that. Like, I have constantly reminded myself, and I try to say, hey, no, like, I want my kid to fail when he's 10. Because if they fail when they're 10, there's really no stakes. I mean, of course, they're disappointed. It was a big game or whatever it was. Like, but I don't want my kid to fail for the first time when he's 18, right? Failing, quote unquote, failing or having a setback or a letdown or one of those moments that get away. If you've been protected and that path has been just paved for you your whole life under the guise of being in your best interest to develop confidence, you've really developed a false confidence, because now all of a sudden you're going to find somebody at some point either better than you or a game that's not going to go your way. It's inevitable. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And the more you challenge yourself and the harder competition and the higher level you try to pursue, the more likely and the more often that it's going to happen. So I'd rather that happen to my kid when he's 10 and have that bad game and that tough ride home and feeling like he let his team down or lost his starting position or didn't make the team, whatever the category of, quote unquote failure is. I'd rather them learn to deal with those setbacks now when they're 10 and they're at home and they're with mom and dad and we can talk through it. They're a little more open-minded. An 18-year-old who's never experienced failure, who's always been the best kid, who's never had never had a game that he lost because everything was paved for him. He always made the team. He was always the starting shortstop. That kid all of a sudden at 18 could experience his first setback. And that's a heck of a lot of it. That's a different time for these kids, the way their brains are wired, the way they're maturing, and that's a whole different animal. And I think all of a sudden that kid doesn't know how to handle it because it's the first time he's ever done it. So I'm a big believer, fail often, fail early on, and then we got to really work on what is the process for overcoming failure, by talking about it and making a plan and making sure the mindset is the right. So there's a lot to that psychology, but yeah, I'd rather our kids fail when they're 9 and 10 than when they're 20.
What great advice he's got. And I hope all you parents out there are coaching or are going to be coaching, take heed to that. It's been a great show this week with Bill Baggett coming back on to tell us about the past. Each week I talk about who we're going to have. We had Kurt Street. He was great. Greg Olson. Know you enjoyed that, but next week we're going to have a good one. Like I say, the show must go on. I'm trying. We're going to have the University of Connecticut basketball coach, Danny Hurley, talking about his take on kids playing sports. So I want to thank you for joining us this week. And every Friday at 11 a.m., we'll be here talking about why Johnny hates sports and what we can do about it.
This program is sponsored by Sir Durf Publishing in the interest for better sports for kids, better kids for life.
In this best-selling book, a child, while failing to live up to his father's expectations, is shamed and humiliated beyond belief. He vows to never allow his own son to face the same.